time of the meeting, 25:39. Okay, perfect. Okay, hello everyone. You're very welcome to today's Doctoral College webinar. And we're looking today at something called Organising and Analysing Qualitative Data in your PhD. And what we're doing is, providing you with hopefully some insights and some guidance for you on your PhD journey. So I'm just going to take you through what it is that we're going to look at. First of all, throughout today's webinar, just the overarching themes that are there within the webinar itself, and that will just give you an idea of what to expect. So the first thing we're going to look at is, just an overview of qualitative research. So we're just going to look at, what's qualitative research, what's the importance of it. We're just going to look then at the characteristics of qualitative research, things like, interpretive research, descriptive and exploratory, and also then just at some of the methods that we would use, like focus groups, interviews, observations, semi-structured interviews, for example, things like a case study, document analysis, etc. So that's the first, that's just going to give you an overview. Then we're just going to look at research design and planning. And here we'll be looking at things like research questions and formulating research questions. Also at things like sampling and the kinds of sampling you could use and what kind of sampling methods you could use. And also then just ethical considerations, just things like informed consent, confidentiality, and ethical approval, and just how to gain consent from people before conducting the research and the importance of that. Afterwards, just looking at data management tools, and that would be looking at various tools like, say, like in vivo, or even just the AI QDA, what they call quantitative data analysis tool, which is what's it called? It's called Atlas TI, and things like Max QDA, which again are like very, very useful data management tools, which can help you to organize and analyze your data. And we're also going to look at things like briefly, as I say, this is quite a short webinar, so we're just going to give an overview, if you like, of of qualitative research within that. But just looking at things like, say, things like coding, memoing, and things like data visualization, just how you segment your research, or how you present your research, and just looking at, say, maybe creating a mind map, or a lot of visuals with regard to your data, to represent your data, and to see if that's in any way effective for your own particular purposes. And then just about, things like, well, how do you choose various data management tools? What factors come into play when it comes to selecting your data management tools? And so the next thing that we'll be looking at is just how to organize your qualitative data. So looking at, say, things like coding, categorization, and things like data storage, which again, are very, very, very much considered and taken into account, perhaps a lot more than they were before. For example, like data could be stored before physically. Usually it might be a transcript that was, or handwritten notes or something like this, and they could be destroyed after a certain amount of time. But now there are many more issues with regard to that, perhaps, to where data is stored. Is it stored on the cloud? Is it accessible by other people? It's rarely the case now that data is held physically under lock and key, and that is the only representation or manifestation of the data. Data is just it's intangible in many ways, and so there's a lot of ethical issues with regard to data storage, and how long the data should be kept for, and maintaining backups and things like this. So there's a huge, a lot of things to consider when you're engaging in any kind of research, but particularly with qualitative research. So then we'll just look at, say, analyzing qualitative data. Again, we're just going to spend just a very brief amount of time on this. So looking at things like, say, thematic analysis, content analysis, maybe we'll get a chance just to discuss briefly narrative analysis, and then just the common challenges and solutions that you might find. Like you might find that you've, data overload, or you might have biases within the data, or some kind of subjectivity, or what else might there be? There could be things like just ensuring that you maintain, that your own biases and prejudices, if you like, don't come into play when it comes to doing your research, and that subjectivity that we're all prone to doesn't manifest itself in the findings of your research. And then just looking at, if you like, just ways maybe of dealing with some of those challenges. And I think the last aspect, this is the last aspect then, would be something like sharing and reporting of your findings, and that would be just like the writing up of your data. How do you structure the chapters, things like presentations, and just sharing your findings. What might be the best way to do that? A lot of your own various interpretations of that, and then obviously the best aspect would be publishing your data, so, and your and just what and so maybe we'll have time to discuss just the importance of following the journal guidelines for manuscript submission. Okay, so let's look at the overview of qualitative research. And as I say, if you have at any stage any question, then please, feel totally free to unmute your microphone and ask a question at any stage. It really is, it's no problem whatsoever. Okay, so let's see what are we talking about here. So just about understanding what qualitative research is and why it's important. So say, for example, if I'm doing a study on patient experiences in healthcare settings, that would be an example, say, of and I'm doing it using open-ended questions to gather, and to gather up in-depth responses. That would be an example of qualitative research, and that would be, if you like, why it is important. Now, we often say that why qualitative research is the preferred option with many researchers is because of the depth of data it can provide. This should not in any way denigrate, quantitative data, which obviously gives us, a great deal of very, very rich data with regard to findings that we can see, with numbers, and that obviously is like hugely important. And it would be really difficult to conduct, a census of Ireland by looking, at qualitative data, because we're reliant a lot on getting responses from people door to door about their, how they perceive various questions or various phenomena. So, but qualitative data, we can say, is really, really important for the depth of data, for the depth of understanding that you will get, that you won't necessarily always get with quantitative data. But quantitative data obviously has got a huge plus side also, in the sense that, you can analyze, hundreds and even millions of subjects at a particular time, something which is really very, very difficult, if nigh on impossible to do in a qualitative research form. Okay, so we'll look then at just the characteristics of it. So this, again, I may be going over some of these things in a kind of, quick or superficial way. So if you like, please feel free to interject at any stage, because I think I said I have 8 slides here, but I just want to make sure we have enough time for a discussion. But I just want to make sure and give you an overview of what it is that we are, of an overview of qualitative research. But when it comes to, say, exploratory research. This would be, for example, research that hasn't before been studied in depth. So this is where you're breaking new ground in terms of looking at um, particular phenomena. And descriptive, obviously, this is where you're describing rather than explaining what those phenomena are. And interpretive, interpretive research. This is where research that you're undertaking is very much open to subjectivity, because even when we are, say, for example, conducting semi-structured interviews or focus groups or observations or um, just structured interviews, whatever it may be, we are dealing with people whose interpretations of phenomena are likely to be subjective. I think we're all prone to that. For example, we're going to tell a particular story, or we're going to interpret an event, or whatever it may be, from our own perspective. So that's, if you like, one of the characteristics of qualitative research, that it is interpretive, and also you're bringing your own, maybe even like subconscious biases to the interpretation of the data itself. So that's just important to remember, that qualitative research, it's exploratory, it's descriptive, and it can be interpretive as well. Okay, so next thing we'll just look at briefly when we talk about qualitative research is just methods. So here we might look at say types of methods that can be used, like interviews or focus groups or observations or kinds of document analysis. And say, for example, I mentioned last week in the literature review webinar about looking at social media, or looking about perceptions of social media and how they might have changed over time. And here, you could conduct a series of semi-structured interviews with people who have been social media users for a long period of time, to gain their interpretation and their perception of what it has done to them in terms of, say, their what we might call their engagement with social media, and how they perceive it. And as I said, when the social media first came into widespread use, many people did perceive it as something very positive, that it could create a strong community, be it of rekindling old friendships, or just of maintaining contact with each other, or else acting as a real excellent way, or like a community of learning. And now it would be very difficult to find people who would look upon social media as as something that is overwhelmingly positive. We could see a huge amount of toxic observations and messages on social media that have really made it very difficult for a lot of people to interact with. So it would be interesting to conduct some kind of qualitative research to see, how, with users of social media, to see how their perceptions of that have changed over time. Okay, so again, I'm just going to be quite brief here in each of these slides about the various concepts and ideas that we're looking at. So I'm just looking at, first of all, research questions, and formulating the importance of formulating clear and focused research questions. And again, and I've said this so often, you'll be fed up of hearing me say this, but just how important it is to have your research question, to have a strong research question. A research question, though, is not something you're going to get on day one. It's going to be something that's iterative. It's something you'll have to hone and work on and really refine over time. But also, it is your guide on your research journey. That is what is going to determine so much when it comes to your research and to so much of your writing, and it's going to have a big will likely have a determining factor in what research methods you use, and it will also have a huge impact on the kind of findings that you come up with. So it's really important that when you do your literature review and you find what is the gap in the literature and how you're going to address that, that you have, you know, a really strong question, research question, which is going to help you to address that gap in the in the literature or in knowledge or in professional practice. So that's why it's really important to have clear and focused and strong research questions, and something that, you know, hasn't been necessarily undertaken before, but something that's achievable and feasible as well. Because there's no point having a research question if it can't be in any way answered, but also if it can't be, but if it's something that is going to take, you know, a crazy number of years to finish as a study. Okay, now sampling. Again, this is going to be an important factor for yourselves if you're conducting qualitative research. For those of you who are, you know, going to use sampling, and how do you, for example, you know, when you come to the research design stage, you really have to think, well, how am I going to, what kind of participants am I going to choose, you know? And we'll come to this later again when it comes to, you know, when you're looking for people with specific characteristics, for example. You know, you could decide, okay, I'm going to do purposive sampling, because in that way, you know, I can select particular participants that have, you know, the characteristics that I need. So you may decide, okay, I want to do a study of, I don't know, you know, of primary school children with ADHD, for example. So in that case, it's purposive. You're selecting participants with specific and particular characteristics. So again, you know, that's going to be a big determinant perhaps of your sampling method, because you may then be conducting a study in which you use other kinds of sampling methods. But it's so important, you know, that when you're looking at the kind of any kind of study that you're undertaking, just, you know, who are the participants that you're going to choose? Are you going to choose from the general population? Are you going to choose from people with specific characteristics? And then, you know, what kind of sampling methods are you going to use as a result of that, of that decision? Then you would need also to look at, say, for example, you know, kind of the ethical considerations, and you have to think then, well, you know, it's so important that you observe, you know, that you obtain or that you have the participants in your study that they write, you know, that they have agreed to participate in the study, and that they have signed the consent forms that you've given them before you interview them, and that you have indeed obtained ethical approval from one of the ethics committees within the university. So first of all, you've informed consent, you know, so obviously, you know, that's obviously, oh, sorry, informed consent, you know, where you have where the participants are aware of the kind of study that's taking place, and you have their consent in order to undertake the research, you know, involving them. And then it may be the case that you have to consider, they may wish not to be named, for example, so you may have to consider things like anonymity and confidentiality, and not to reveal who they are. And then obviously ethical approval, you know, and this can take some time, particularly when you're dealing with, you know, well, I suppose you have to get ethical approval if you're dealing with, you know, human participants, or if you're dealing with, you know, any kinds of human or animal tissue, or anything that's going to have some kind of ethical ramifications. You do need to get ethical approval for that. But the golden rule is that where there are human participants in your study who, you know, are going to be, for example, who you're going to interview and study, then you must get ethical approval in advance in order to undertake that study. Okay, so just again, I'm going through a lot of, there's a, you know, it's probably a lot of information here quite quickly, but I just want to give you this kind of overview of undertaking qualitative data. And one of the most important things when you're doing qualitative data, obviously, is how do you, how do you actually analyze that the data. So obviously you have to consider, well, what are the techniques and tools that are there for gathering, qualitative data. And I remember that I used, for example, I used audio recorders for interviews when I was when I was undertaking my research in the field. So you have to think of, well, what kind of tools are you going to use for gathering the data when it comes to data collection? And obviously, transcription again. I undertook a lot of excuse me. I undertook a lot of interviews for my own PhD, and I remember that I actually went through all the interviews, and I transcribed them myself. And I remember using it was like I had a device which I could, by pressing my foot, I could scroll backwards and forwards with the. So if I wanted to go back on a piece of an interview, I would then press that. There was a little lever there. I just pressed that with my left foot. It went back. If I wanted to go forward, I just pressed something with my right foot. That would take me on to the next stage of the interview, and it was very sophisticated for its time. But now we have so many platforms, so many forms of software which can help you in terms of transcription. The one thing I would say with transcription, and what I found, or why I did my own transcription, was because I was able, when doing the interviews, to remember what the context of what I was saying. I found I was able then to transcribe everything accurately. Sometimes it was very difficult to hear what the person was saying because of no ambient noise, or sometimes it just might have been very difficult. I might have spoken in a very soft voice, and it was very difficult to hear what they were saying at times. So, but it was really helpful then that I could remember, if you like, and you would remember the context when you're in the room with somebody. You will remember, what they were saying at a particular time. And I had my own set of questions there anyway, so I was able, if you like, to use that to be able to transcribe the data that I was, or transcribe, say, the interviews that I had conducted. But I think, nowadays, say you have so many tools, like say, and so many AI tools or generative AI tools that are, really fantastic when it comes to transcription. I think, this whole webinar today is being transcribed. Not that I'm going to do anything with the transcription itself, but it just shows you that you'll have, a auto-generated transcript afterwards. Now, the important thing to do, and with anything that involves AI or anything that doesn't involve your own hand, is that it's so important that you read through that you comb through it and proofread it, because you will find, again, as with a lot of AI generated material, that there will be errors there. There will be, just things that would be very embarrassing for you to get into the public domain. So it's really important that if you do use any assistance or any kind of, any software or any kind of AI tool to assist you in terms of transcription, that you go through, you go through the transcript and you analyze it in a very detailed way to make sure that everything within the interview is not, everything within that transcript is correct. And that's why I would say that this is so important. Also, familiarization, immersing yourself within the data. So if you have a transcript, I would say read through that transcript multiple times to understand the content and the context of that content, the context of that content as well. I just say that is really, really important, because, as I say, if you just use AI generated tool for a transcript, you will be embarrassed with the results. If you just, take and cut and paste it, you will, you'll find that some of the results are absolutely just not reflective at all of what is being said in the interviews. Okay. Now, just when it comes to data management tools, and perhaps when it comes to qualitative data, the one, I suppose, the gold standard in the field at the moment is in vivo, which is brilliant in terms of helping to organize and analyze any kind of data and to classify and to sort out and to arrange information. But also, I mentioned there Atlas TI. Now, Atlas TI, I think it's the first. It's the first in the world. I think it's the first. I think this was the first mover, the first AI tool for what we call QDA, or quantitative data analysis. So, and again, I'm not sure how it works. I haven't really seen it in action. Atlas TI, I'm aware of it, but as I say, I've seen in vivo in action and used in vivo, but not Atlas TI. And again, I imagine, I'm not sure, there may be some drawbacks with it. It may be something that you do need to be aware of and be careful of when you're using, as I said, any kind of AI tool like this, because it may interpret your data in a way that it really needs to be looked at again. And that's why it's so important at all times just to make sure, that you look at the transcript again and again. And there's also Max QDA, which is another kind of platform or software which is used to organize and analyze data, to organize qualitative data, qualitative and mixed methods data, and is very good in terms of helping to classify and to sort out and to arrange information. And in vivo, we know, is really good in terms of coding transcripts, so it can take particular themes and help you to code these, and that absolutely is invaluable, I think, because again, many years ago, and I don't mean to sound like I don't mean to sound like I grew up in some kind of deprived era, but or some technologically deprived era, but it would have been amazing to have, during my PhD, to have something which would help you to code all the a piece of software which would help you to code transcripts. That would have been absolutely glorious to have. So but anyway, so just in terms of data management tools, so you're looking at coding, obviously, and for which in vivo is absolutely fantastic. Then something called memoing and data visualization. So coding, if you like, is going to help you just to organize and to analyze data and to pick out particular themes. Memoing is more like where you're writing down, where you're taking notes and annotating, the qualitative data while you're going through it. Data visualization, I'll talk about that in a moment. I just want to give you a representation with a graph just to show you about data visualization. And I just want to talk briefly about the factors, to choose, or factors to consider when you're selecting software. I would say that, again, this is very much open to interpretation, but I think when you're evaluating software to use, or what kind of software to use, you've got to think of what is the ease of, what are the features of that, how easy is it to use, how user friendly is it, and also, if you are thinking of using a software such as, for example, Atlas TI, which, as I say, is the first AI tool for quantitative data analysis, just think about what the drawbacks might be with that. As I say, I haven't used it. It may be wonderful, but just find out. And as I say, because it's AI, because it's generative AI, I would say just be wary of it at first. Not wary of the software itself, but be wary of what it gives you, because it may be that it has interpreted your data in a way that is not really accurate. Again, that's just my speculation. I'm just going on other AI tools, and I'm not saying not to use AI tools, but just to be wary when it comes to them, that you have to sometimes check what's in the data. To so much you have to clarify and to find out and ensure that it's accurate, that sometimes the amount of energy you expend on using an AI tool is can be quite substantial. So that's all I'd say about that for now. Okay, and this is an example. For example, this is like a mind map and a way, for example, of thinking about how you're going to represent your data, or just in terms of, say, thinking about a visual map of your themes and your sub themes. And again, don't have any information in there that's for you to think about, for example, but it might be a way of it's always a good way of I always found this very useful, of doing something which was like just a visual map of all the themes and the sub themes of your research. And it just helps, I suppose it just helps, depends who you are, but I found it helped me to clarify what I was doing, and what the important themes were within the research itself. I'll give an example also just of what I call data visualization, or representing data in a visual way. And you might be overwhelmed by the amount of elements that are within this, but you can see here, this is like a representation of data with perhaps it's like an overwhelming, it's almost like sensory overload when you do see data like this. And perhaps that's an exaggeration, but it's just showing you that data can be represented in a visual way, as well as being we talked about coding and memoing and data visualization. And sometimes when you're doing your research, it can just help you to do graphic interpretations of the data that you're that you're studying, and that you're mining for those bits of information which are really going to help and enhance your PhD. So just a few more slides to go here. Coding, I said there's all kinds of different kinds of coding. I think we could say these are the ones I've come across, which are open, axial, and selective coding. And I think when it comes to, say, open coding, we'd be talking there about it would be, you're examining the data for any kind of potential. So I suppose it's really kind of like it's maybe inductive in the way that you are, you're mining that, you're looking at it, you're looking at all the data and seeing, what can be used here, what can be derived from this. Then axial is more about where you're identifying, if you like, some large themes within the data itself. So you've gone from open coding, from open coding, which is examining the data for potential, to axial, which I would say is looking at larger themes, and then to selective coding. So this is where you're identifying perhaps a secret, it's not a secret, but you're identifying a central theme, or a core theme or core category for your for your research. So you could use, for example, open coding to identify what might be, say, the initial themes in your interview data. So you're looking at your interviews, and then you're saying, okay, I'm going to use open coding here. This will help me to identify particular themes from the data. With axial coding, you're perhaps identifying some larger themes, and with selective coding, that's where you're identifying a central theme or a central category. So it's different kind of coding, if you like, you could say, by degrees. But it's just good to be aware, even if you're not using even if say you're just using open coding, it's just good to be aware of both selective and axial coding as well. And then when it comes to say organizing qualitative data, just about how you group these codes into particular themes. So you could be say when you're engaged in coding, you may decide, well, you're going to categorize these codes into various into various groups. Like say, for example, you might put down student engagement on one hand or learning challenges in the other, when it comes to say if you're doing something with say if you're doing a study, for example, with I don't know, like interviews with teachers about classroom management, for example, you may end up with various categories like, yes, what's student engagement like, what's learning challenges, and they would be your groups. They would be, they're the themes that you are coding, and you're saying, okay, here's one category, student engagement. Here's the other category, learning challenges, and you'd have different categories for that, and you'd be able then to use your data. You'd be able then to use the software to put the data into and under those particular themes. So it can be very, very useful indeed. I said perhaps I said too much at the start about data storage, but again, it's just really important that that you're aware of, say, how you could use cloud storage, for example, in a way to securely store and to back up data, and if necessary, to confiscate that data ultimately. But it's just such a huge theme today about how you secure data and where you store it and how you store it, and making sure that you have backups of it also. But it may be a condition of your research that you have to be rid of your data within a certain number of years. So be mindful of that also. And there's some great resources and great people in library and information services here in UL. Armin Strauba is just one of the world's leading experts on data management, and he runs it all the time. He's running courses and seminars for students and for PhD candidates about how you store data, how you back it up, and how you maintain it, and how you eventually confiscate it if necessary. Okay. Just about if you're talking about analysis of qualitative data, so you might, for example, if you're looking at that whole area of say you're looking at pupils in a school, and you're looking at things like engage. What did I say earlier about classroom engagement, was it? And student engagement and learning challenges that might be involved. So you may want to look then at various themes. But you're doing a thematic analysis here. So that means within the data, you're trying to identify particular themes or particular patterns that reoccur within the data itself. So you could be looking at things like you could be looking at stress within the classroom, at lack of motivation. You could be looking at things like self-esteem issues, or maybe mental health issues, whatever it may be. All of these things would be worth putting into particular themes and to analyzing those themes in a very thorough way. So here you're trying to identify, as I say, you're trying to here identify and to find recurring themes. So if you see only one incident of low motivation, that you may decide, well, that's not enough of a one is not enough of a sample here to include within my, thematic analysis. So you're looking for particular themes that are coming through in the data itself. And obviously, content, this is where your content analysis, and this sounds like some kind of oxymoron where you're quantifying qualitative data. So you're quantifying the qualitative. So what do we mean by that? Because again, that sounds like, that sounds like something of a paradox. But here, what you're doing in quantifying, and I have to be careful how I say this. So you're quantifying qualitative data. So that means that you are, but when we say I have to say it again. When you are quantifying, I'll get this right someday. When you're quantifying qualitative data, what you are doing is you're counting the frequency of specific phrases or specific words that reoccur within the data. So that's really useful in terms of, when you're doing content analysis, your deep breath, quantifying qualitative data. So by doing that, that really is useful in terms of helping you to identify themes that are coming through in the data itself, because there you're looking for. So if you see that a particular element comes through or particular words are coming through, like say if you see the phrase self-esteem coming through again and again, then obviously that is some area that you are, when you're looking at your data, that's going to be worthy of analysis. So that is, when we are looking at content analysis, it's why it's really useful, again, to use some kind of software like NVivo, or perhaps even Max QDA, or the generative AI tool for qualitative data analysis, Atlas TI. Just that would really, really help you in terms of picking out the frequency with which certain phrases, certain words, certain appear in responses. Okay. Hopefully that's not too confusing. Quantifying qualitative data. Okay. So next, just looking at what we might call narrative analysis. So that's looking at, personal accounts. This could be looking at something like, say, the experience of Irish immigrants in London in the 1980s, for example. You might be looking at something like that, or perhaps you could be even doing a comparison of that with, Irish immigrants in London in the 1980s, and comparing and contrasting their stories with immigrants to Ireland in the 2020s. So, it's analyzing and looking at those life stories, to understand how they have adapted to a particular environment. So that's what I mean by, creating then a narrative from that, and a strong story as a result. These challenges tend to happen to everyone engaged in qualitative analysis. Sometimes you have data overload. It feels like you're dealing with so much huge amount of data. It can sometimes feel overwhelming, and that is where the likes of NVivo and Max QDA can be really, really useful, because they can help you just to identify particular themes, or to analyze and organize your data, and to classify, to arrange and sort your data and your information into particular categories. Bias obviously is another issue, and maintaining your objectivity. So again, how can you not tell that someone that you're interviewing, is telling the story solely from their own perspective? And what's your own bias when it comes to dealing with your interpretation of the data? So how do you maintain objectivity. You know, it could be the case that you grow very attached to the people that you're studying, and how do you then maintain your objectivity when you're writing your findings about a particular group or a particular cohort? Here, I think it's always good, you know, to discuss, you know, to have regular reviews, peer debriefing, reflexivity. What I'm trying to think of here is just what's really good is to discuss your findings with your peers, with your supervisors, with you know, people in your faculty, about, you know, because by discussing your findings with them, you can then see if you're engaged in any kind of in any kind of a bias. I think by undertaking kind of regular reviews of the work that you've done, it can help you to become more objective and to become less subjective, and to see, well, you know, how important it is to be objective in your work and in your analysis, because really subjective work, it's, you know, it has less, I would say anyway, I think it has less academic credibility, I would say, the more subjective that it is. But another thing also is just to engage in reflexivity, and that can really help you to deal with things like, you know, maintaining your objectivity, because to reflect more and more on what it is that you're doing, that can help you to maintain and to rebalance your levels of objectivity, and to overcome bias as well. For data overload, as I say, I think what's really good there is to use some of those software tools, because I think that they're invaluable, especially in Vivo, I think is just fantastic. But also, you know, Max QDA has a great reputation as well. And Atlas TI, as I say, it's only, I've only become aware of that very, very recently. I'm not sure how effective it is, but some of the reviews that I've seen of it say that it's a wondrous thing. But again, that time will perhaps let us know how excellent it is. Okay, so the last thing I just want to say is just about, okay, so I'm just going to go through this briefly here. So the writing up stage, just structuring your findings. So how do you do that? So it may be useful for you. Again, this is something you really need to discuss with your supervisor, but just to organize your findings with particular themes, you know, and to have kind of quotes as well to support and to bolster up your argument. The other way you could do this, you know, in particular when it comes to conferences or seminars or intra, you know, maybe say intra-faculty group meetings, you know, or if you're having your own PhD networks, just using, you know, visual aids and graphs and things like that, to mind maps as well, to communicate your research. And then, you know, just you know, publishing, obviously that's where you want to really be when it comes to your research. That's, if you like, almost the gold standard when it comes to sharing your findings. You want to get into the best journals, and just in terms of preparing articles for journals, you know, just to make sure that you follow the journal guidelines for you know, when it comes to submitting your manuscript. So that is all I have to say, which again is perhaps a lot. So it's been, I really appreciate the fact that you have been able to stay, you know, with this webinar for as long as you have. I'm going to stop the recording now, and then what we're going to do is just to have a discussion, a short discussion, if you want to query or suggest anything after this webinar. So thank you so much for your time, and for anybody who is watching the webinar afterwards, I hope you enjoyed and got some guidance at least from that. So thank you all very much indeed.